It was 2016 when my client, let's call her Diane, hired me as a coach to help her with a problem that was destroying her life. Diane had no energy, but her lack of energy wasn't that normal tiredness that we all feel at the end of the day. It was a paralyzing, bone-deep exhaustion. It was an exhaustion that didn't go away no matter how much she rested or slept. She no longer had the energy to hang out with her friends or family. She had nothing left to give her children. She dragged herself out of bed each morning to go to work, but then once there, she didn't perform like she used to. She felt ashamed as her once successful law career was coming undone, and she was starting to have some troubling physical symptoms that worried her. When I first saw her on the computer screen for our online session, I could tell she was a straight-to-the-point kind of person who knew, or thought she knew, exactly what she needed. She told me she wanted help getting her energy back, that she felt like a battery running low, and wanted me to help her charge up again so she could go on living her life as she did before. But pretty quickly, I saw that her problem wasn't really a lack of energy, it was something else entirely. Something that I knew would take a while for her to confront and change. In the years since I worked with Diane, I've seen hundreds of clients with the exact same problem, and this may be happening to you right now too. You may be thinking that your issue is a lack of energy or simple exhaustion from your busy life, but what if I told you that no amount of charging your battery will make you feel better? At least not until you first stop doing a specific unhealthy behavior that's quite common for most of us. In this video, you'll learn what that behavior is, and most importantly, how to break the behavior and finally feel your energy come back to you again. In 2016, my client Diane thought she had a simple energy depletion problem, and that if she could just somehow fill herself up with energy, her life would be better. But she was seeing the problem all wrong. Let's use a bucket and a jug of water to work through Diane's problem. So Diane was assuming that she was like a bucket that just needed to be filled with water, the water representing energy or chi. Seen that way, it makes sense because if I put water into a bucket, it's going to eventually fill up, so problem solved, right? But Diane was looking at this all wrong. The problem wasn't that she needed more energy or more water in the bucket. The problem was something altogether different. The issue was that her bucket had a bunch of holes in it. So what would happen if I tried to pour water in this bucket if it were filled with holes? This, right? A bucket with holes will never truly fill up with water, will it? The holes in this metaphoric bucket represented places in Diane's energy field where she was losing a lot of chi in an unhealthy way. Another way of saying this is that Diane was giving away her energy or power in a self-damaging way. Her exhaustion and loss of energy were so bone deep and depleting that it was even starting to make her physically sick. But what exactly was draining her energy to this extent? If you resonate with my client Diane and also feel like you're giving away energy or power in an unhealthy way, consider coaching with me in my private community, Heart Alchemy. Inside, we'll get clear on exactly what is depleting you and what you need to change in your life in order to start feeling more alive and energized again. When you enter Heart Alchemy, you'll transform beyond what you thought possible, like my client Holly, who said that Heart Alchemy helped her expand and thrive more than years of counseling. To learn more about Heart Alchemy, go over to my Instagram with the handle The Heart Alchemist and DM me the word heart25. I knew pretty quickly what the issue was the first time I met Diane and asked permission to read her energy. And I also had a sense that deep down inside of her, she knew what the real issue was too. She loved talking about her children, her work, her relationship with her family and friends, but one thing she didn't really like to get into in those first couple of sessions together was her relationship with her husband. But as she slowly started to trust me, she began to voice what I had been seeing psychically in her energy field. She had been married for more than a decade, and in the beginning, everything seemed amazing. She was in love and felt seen, but as the years progressed, and especially after she had a spiritual awakening, the relationship got progressively worse. But the relationship got worse not really because her husband had changed, it was because Diane changed, and she was now seeing more clearly. She was able to see how poorly she had always been treated and how the marriage had never been a healthy love bond. She could see clearly how her marriage reflected so many unhealed unhealed wounds she had inside of her about her worth and what she deserved. She opened up about how her husband would often speak to her in a condescending and disrespectful way. She finally learned about narcissism and what codependency was. And the more she could see her marriage more clearly, she could see just how many excuses she made for her husband and how many fantasies she created about her own marriage. One day I asked her, if you know your husband is the hole in your bucket, why didn't you say it the first time we met? And she responded, I wasn't and still am not ready. What my client Diane went through is something that many spiritual people experience, including you and me. It's when we connect with someone or something that drains us more than it feeds us. I call these connections lower connections because spiritually, the point of connection is coming from the lower 3 chakras of your system. A psychic can see a hole in the person's lower chakras and an energy cord directing a person's vital energy outward toward the person or thing that they are connecting to. These cords are a type of energy wound that comes from trauma or immature bonding patterns, usually stemming from issues in your childhood. The lower 3 chakras are the foundation of the system, and they deal with core issues like our feelings of safety, our bonding with others, and a sense of agency or personal power. When our 3 lower chakras are wounded, they create holes in them, like the holes in a bucket, and through those holes, our vital energy drains out towards people or situations that are unhealthy. My client Diane's marriage was a lower connection because what connected her to her husband were energy cords in her wounded lower chakras, where her energy was draining out of her and feeding her husband, but leaving her almost incapacitated. Recently, I was watching the TV documentary show Couples Therapy, which follows the work of Dr. Orna Gorelnik as she works with couples struggling with their relationships. One of the couples on the show was Jessica and Boris, who had been married for almost a decade. When I saw them on screen, I was immediately reminded of my client Diane because of just how drained and almost lifeless Jessica looked after years of being in a lower connection with a partner who was clearly narcissistic. Look closely at Jessica as her husband talks. I've taken the sound out of the clip so you can focus on her energy. Watch how she barely breathes, she's frozen, she's drained, she looks completely broken, all while her husband Boris has energy, and you can see just how much power he has over her diminished energy field. This is a real-world example of what a lower connection looks like and just how draining it is to the person who stays in it. Now, the million-dollar question is, how did my client Diane or Jessica in the TV show or any of us ever get into this place where we are completely exhausted and depleted of all of our life force? And this doesn't just happen with romantic relationships. I've worked with many clients who have been in lower connections with a parent, a sibling, a friend, or even with their jobs or status. Lower connections aren't always with a person. These cords can be established with material things, where we give away all our energy in blind pursuit of something like money, fame, or status. And we all do this at some point in our lives. But why? Why would Jessica stay with Boris for so long? Why did my client Diane say to me that she wasn't ready to confront the truth about her marriage yet? Why have I stayed in lower connections with romantic partners and even with friends in my own life? There are 2 reasons for this. The first one is that there is a profound fear. Remember when I said that lower connections affect your 3 lower chakras? When you have wounded lower chakras, you will inevitably fear a lot of things in your life. It could be fear of change, a fear of losing a relationship, even if that relationship isn't good for you, or a fear of taking action, a fear of standing in your power. All of these fears are coming from these lower connections. The second reason is energy depletion. As lower connections make us lose vital energy from our bodies, we are progressively more exhausted to the point that acting feels almost impossible. This is what Diane felt, and I also remember that feeling in one of my past relationships. I remember lying in bed at night and thinking, what the hell am I still doing here? But the thought of ending the relationship, packing a bag, and leaving, it just felt absolutely overwhelming to my already depleted system. So I stayed until the relationship got so bad and I got so critically depleted that I started to have physical symptoms like high blood pressure, which is something I have never had in my life. But if lower connections make us feel scared and depleted, then how do we get out of them? How do we stop the pattern of staying connected to someone or something that is hurting us? The first step is what I call voicing the truth. Remember that my client Diane refused to talk about her husband when she first started working with me? Do you know why? It was because deep down in the pits of her being was the voice of her inner knowing. And that voice had been talking to Diane for a long time. She just wasn't ready to confront the reality of what the inner voice already knew. And that's why she didn't want to get into discussions around her husband or her marriage. Because if she allowed me to dig, she would have to speak about or say out loud what she already knew inside to be true. And when she finally did trust me enough to open that door, there was a remarkable breakthrough for her. Because in talking about her relationship, she could now see it more clearly, and in seeing it, she became more comfortable to eventually voice the truth that the marriage needed to end for her to thrive. The act of voicing your truth is one of the most powerful moments of healing you could ever have. Not only do you allow your truth to be witnessed by someone else, but there's also something magical that happens when you use the strength of your voice. It gives you an extra boost of energy that, for many people, helps them make the decision and act to get out of the situation. That's exactly what happened to Diane. When she was finally ready to voice the truth that she had held inside of her for years, her marriage quickly ended, and I've seen this more times than I can count. It was so amazing to see a woman who initially looked so defeated when we first started working together turn into a secure woman who was powerful enough to change her whole life with confidence. Which brings us to the second step, acting with confidence. When you confront the reality that you are in a lower connection, you must stop that connection eventually. If your lower connection is with a person, you have to stop connecting with them. If the lower connection is with something like status or money or a career, you have to stop that connection too. What this means energetically is that I have to cut the energy cord that connects me to that person or thing, because it's through that energy cord that I'm losing all of my chi or vital energy like the holes in a bucket. And how do I do that? Well, a lot of spiritual people like to use energy techniques like prayer or affirmations or even sacred smoke to help cut energy cords. But they frequently forget a vital piece of the puzzle. You can only truly cut cords through action. If I had just waved a crystal wand around my client Diane and prayed for her energy cords to dissolve, nothing significant would have happened. Because spiritual practices and tools alone don't do the job. Ultimately, the way Diane cut the cords of her lower connection with her husband was to say, "I want a divorce," and physically remove herself from his presence. When she had that conversation and acted to make it happen, the energy cords she had with her husband dissolved. Yes, afterwards, when she was no longer in his presence, we did do energy clearings to help finish the job, but the most important part was her decisive action. She stopped the behavior of giving her energy and power away. Then comes the third and final step, healing the wounds. There was a reason Diane and her husband manifested each other and stayed in a toxic marriage for so long. They were both wounded. Diane gave her energy away easily. She didn't have boundaries. She didn't love and honor herself. She didn't know what healthy bonding felt like, and she didn't believe she deserved more. And for you and me, the wounds are very similar. When we attract and stay in lower connections, it's because the 3 lower chakras have a lot of unhealed wounds that have not been addressed. No matter how smart we think we are or how spiritual or evolved we believe ourselves to be. We all have wounds in those lower chakras that need to be healed. By the time I got into my last lower connection, I had already been a clinician for almost a decade and had also been working as a coach for almost 4. And remember Jessica from Couples Therapy? She's a psychotherapist. None of our credentials mattered because both of us still ended up in situations that drained the life out of us. So don't feel bad for yourself if you have a lower connection right now in your life. It just means you've got work to do. And if you find yourself in an unfulfilling relationship right now, watch this video next to understand why spiritual women often struggle to find real love.